After my wife Patricia's funeral, the landlord of a house she had been secretly renting called me. His voice was low and urgent, trembling with a gravity that terrified me more than the grief I was already drowning in. He said, "I found something you really need to see, Mr. Foster. Come over now, and whatever you do, do not tell your daughter and her husband." I went straight there, driving through the blinding Seattle rain, with my heart hammering against my ribs. When I opened the door to apartment 404, what I saw did not just shock me. It shattered the entire reality of the 40-year marriage I thought I knew, and it turned my plans for a quiet, lonely retirement into a cold, calculated blueprint for revenge. Before I tell you what was inside that room, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your silence for weakness. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker and the cold seep deeper into your bones. That is how I felt standing by the open grave of the only woman I had ever loved. Cold. So cold that I thought my blood had turned to ice. But the chill did not come from the weather. It came from the two people standing next to me. My daughter Melissa and her husband Brad stood under a large black umbrella, creating a dry island for themselves, while the drizzle soaked the shoulders of my old wool coat. I did not mind the rain. It felt appropriate. It felt like the sky was the only other thing in the world that understood that Patricia was gone. I stared at the mahogany casket, trying to summon a memory of her laugh, to block out the sound of the priest's monotone voice, but I could not focus. I could not focus because Brad was tapping his foot. It was a rhythmic, impatient tapping against the wet grass. Tap, tap, tap. I glanced sideways. Brad was not looking at the grave. He was looking at his phone, shielding the screen from the rain with his cupped hand. The blue light reflected in his glasses. He was checking the scores. I saw the flash of a sports betting app before he quickly slid the phone back into his pocket, catching my eye. He did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed. He leaned over to Melissa and whispered loud enough for me to hear over the sound of the rain falling on the casket. "This is taking forever," he hissed. "My Italian loafers are going to be ruined in this mud." "Do you know how much these cost?" Melissa did not shush him. She did not tell him to show some respect for the woman who had babysitted their children for free every weekend for 10 years. Instead, she sighed, shifting her weight. She checked her watch, a gold timepiece Patricia had given her for graduation. "I know," Melissa whispered back. "I just want to get to the reading of the will. Did Dad say anything to you about the life insurance policy yet? I need to know if it clears before the bank calls again on Monday." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. My wife was not even in the ground yet. The earth had not yet covered her, and they were already picking over her bones like vultures. I tightened my grip on the handle of my cane, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them to leave, to get out of this sacred place and take their greed with them. But I said nothing. I had spent a lifetime saying nothing, letting Patricia be the peacemaker, the bridge between my stubborn silence and their endless demands. Now the bridge was gone, and I was staring into the abyss of their selfishness. As the ceremony ended, people began to disperse, murmuring generic condolences that meant nothing. Brad did not wait for me. He walked briskly toward his leased BMW, checking his shoes for mud spots. Melissa lingered for a second, but not to comfort me. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch light and devoid of warmth. "Dad," she said. I looked at her, searching for my little girl in the face of this 38-year-old stranger. I wanted her to say she missed her mother. I wanted her to cry. "Dad, where is the key to Mom's safety deposit box?" she asked. I stared at her. The question hung in the wet air between us. What I managed to croak out. My voice sounded rusty, unused. "The safety deposit box," Melissa repeated, a hint of impatience creeping into her tone. "Brad says the funeral costs are going to be way higher than we thought. Like $20,000. We need to access her accounts to cover it, so we do not have to dip into our own savings. You know things have been tight for us. $20,000 for a simple service and a plot we bought 20 years ago. I knew Brad was lying. I knew he was inflating the costs to pocket the difference. He had been a struggling real estate agent for a decade, always chasing the next big deal that never happened, always bleeding money into bad investments and gambling. We can discuss this later, Melissa, I said, pulling my arm away. Not here. Not now. Fine, she snapped, pulling her coat tighter. But don't take too long. We are coming over to the house to help you sort through things. You do not need to be alone in that big place with all that clutter. She turned and walked away, her heels sinking into the soft turf. I watched them drive off, leaving me standing alone with the gravediggers. I apologized to Patricia in a whisper. I told her I was sorry I had raised a daughter who could look at her mother's grave and see only a dollar sign. Then I got into my old Ford sedan and drove home, hoping for silence, hoping for just 1 hour to sit in Patricia's favorite chair and smell her perfume on the cushions. But silence is a luxury the poor cannot afford, and peace is something the greedy will never grant you. When I turned onto my street, the street where Patricia and I had lived for 40 years, my heart stopped. There was a truck parked in my driveway. A massive yellow truck with the words 1-800-GOT junk painted in bright blue letters on the side. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the wet asphalt. My front door was wide open. 2 men in uniforms were hauling furniture out of my house. Not just any furniture. They were carrying Patricia's sewing table. The table where she had mended Melissa's dresses, where she had made the curtains for our first apartment, where she had spent countless evenings humming along to the radio. They tossed it into the back of the truck like it was garbage. I heard the wood crack. No! I screamed, scrambling out of the car. I forgot my cane. I forgot the arthritis in my knees. I ran toward them, fueled by a rage so pure it felt like gasoline in my veins. Stop. What are you doing? Put that down. One of the workers looked up, surprised, holding a box of Patricia's knitting yarn. We have a work order, sir, he said, looking confused. The owner said to clear out the first floor. I am the owner, I roared. Get away from my things, Bill. Calm down, you are going to give yourself a heart attack. Brad walked out of my front door. He was holding a beer. My beer. He was wearing his suit pants but had taken off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, looking like a man who had just finished a hard day's work of destroying someone else's life. What is this, Brad? I demanded, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. Why is there a junk truck in my driveway? Why are they taking Patricia's things? We are helping you, Bill, Brad said, taking a sip of the beer. He spoke slowly, condescendingly, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. Melissa and I talked about it. It is too depressing for you to be surrounded by all this stuff. You need a fresh start. Feng shui, you know. We need to clear out the negative energy. Negative energy. I pointed a shaking finger at the truck. That is my wife's life. That is my life. You have no right. Actually, we do. Melissa's voice came from the doorway. She was holding a stack of Patricia's vintage fashion magazines, dumping them into a recycling bin. Mom would not want you living in a museum, Dad. She would want you to move on. Besides, Brad and I are moving in tonight. I froze. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking through my funeral suit, but I barely felt it. What did you say? I whispered. We gave up our apartment, Melissa said, not looking at me. She continued to dump the magazines. Thump, thump, thump. Our lease was up, and with the market the way it is, it just makes sense. You can't live here alone. It is dangerous. What if you fall? We are doing this for you. We will take the master bedroom upstairs, and we set up the sleeper sofa for you in the den. It is cozy. You will like it. They were not asking. They were informing me. They had planned this. While I was sitting by Patricia's hospital bed, holding her hand as she took her last breath, They were terminating their lease. While I was picking out a casket, they were scheduling a junk removal truck. I looked at Brad. He was smirking a subtle, arrogant twist of his lips that said he knew he had won. He knew the house was in both our names, but with Patricia gone, he assumed I was too weak, too old, and too broken to fight back. He saw me not as a father-in-law, but as a tenant he could evict from his own life. "Get the truck out of here," I said, but my voice lacked the power it had moments ago. The shock was setting in. "Bill, be reasonable," Brad said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "The truck is already paid for, non-refundable. If we send them away, that is $500 down the drain. Do you have $500 to waste? Because I know your pension is not exactly generous." He patted my shoulder. It was a heavy, patronizing pat. "Go inside, get dry. We will handle the heavy lifting. You just relax, you are retired, remember? Let the younger generation take charge." He turned back to the movers. "Keep going, guys. Everything in the living room goes, except the flat screen. We will keep that." I stood there in the rain watching them. I watched a stranger carry out the velvet armchair Patricia used to read in. I watched them toss a box of her porcelain figurines, the ones she collected from every state we visited, into the crusher. I heard the sound of shattering ceramic. It sounded like my heart breaking all over again. I wanted to fight them. I wanted to grab a shovel and chase them off my property. But a wave of exhaustion hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. I was 68 years old. I was a retired structural engineer who had spent his life building things that stood strong against the wind and the earth, but I had failed to build a family that could withstand the rot of greed. I walked past Brad, ignoring his victorious grin. I walked past Melissa, who was busy directing the movers to be careful with the walls. I walked into my house, which now echoed with the boots of strangers. It smelled of wet cardboard and impending loss. I retreated to the small den at the back of the house. This was the room they had designated for me. My new cage. It was cramped, smelling of stale dust. They had already moved my things in here, a few boxes of clothes, my old radio, and a picture of me and Patricia from our honeymoon. I sat on the lumpy sleeper sofa and put my head in my hands. The walls felt like they were closing in. I could hear them in the living room laughing. Brad was making a joke about how much space they would have for a pool table once the dining set was gone. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just a senile old man who would fade into the background, signing checks and cooking dinner until I finally did them the favor of dying. And sitting there in the dark, listening to the rain hammer against the window, I almost believed them. I almost believed that this was it. That this was how my story ended. A sad, pathetic footnote in the lives of two selfish narcissists. But then I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was Patricia's phone. I had kept it charged, unable to bring myself to turn it off. I pulled it out. The screen was glowing in the dim light. Unknown caller. I stared at it. Who would be calling Patricia? Her friends knew she was gone. The doctors had stopped calling. I swiped the screen and held the phone to my ear, not saying a word. "Hello?" A voice rasped. It was a man's voice, deep-accented, rough like sandpaper. Is this the husband? Who is this?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "My name is Gianni," the voice said. "I am the landlord. Listen, I saw the obituary in the paper today. I am sorry. She was a good woman, a saint." Landlord. I frowned, confusion cutting through my grief. "You must have the wrong number. My wife did not rent any property. We have lived in our house on Elm Street for 40 years. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy, pregnant silence. "You did not know," the man said. It was not a question. "Know what? What are you talking about, Mr. Foster?" The man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Patricia has been renting apartment 404 in my building for the last 6 years. She made me promise never to send mail to your house. She paid in cash, every month, on the 1st. I sat up straight, the blood rushing in my ears. Apartment. 6 years. My Patricia. The woman who told me she was going to the library or the community center or to have coffee with friends. The lease expired today, Gianni continued. I was going to pack up her things, but I found something. I found a lot of things. And there is a letter here with your name on it, taped to a box. It says, "For Bill, only for Bill." I stood up. The fatigue was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp adrenaline. "Where are you?" I asked. "I am at the Overlook Apartments, on 4th and Main. You know the place, I knew it. It was in Chinatown, a rough neighborhood, not the kind of place Patricia would ever go." "I am coming," I said. "Wait," Gianni said sharply. "One more thing. This is important. Do not tell your daughter. Do not tell that husband of hers." Patricia was terrified of them finding out about this place. She said if anything happened to her, I was to call you and only you. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because, Mr. Foster," Gianni said, and I could hear the click of a lighter on the other end. "I think what is in this room is going to explain everything, but you need to see it with your own eyes. Come now, and make sure you are not followed." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand shaking. Outside in the living room, I heard the crash of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by Brad's laughter. "Oops," Brad shouted. "Guess we needed a new china cabinet anyway." I looked at the closed door of the den. I looked at the picture of Patricia on the table. Her eyes seemed to be trying to tell me something. Secrets. She had secrets. For 6 years, my wife had a secret life, a secret apartment, and a secret fear of our own children. I grabbed my coat. I checked the hallway. Brad and Melissa were distracted, arguing about where to mount the TV. I slipped out the back door into the mud, into the rain. I did not take my car. Brad would hear the engine. I walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, blending into the shadows, a ghost in my own neighborhood. I was not just a grieving widower anymore. I was a man on a mission. And as the bus rumbled toward downtown, carrying me toward a truth I was not sure I could handle, I realized one thing. The funeral was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. The springs of the old sleeper sofa dug into my back like the bony fingers of a ghost refusing to let me rest. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the den, a room that used to be my sanctuary. For 20 years, this was the place where I read my engineering journals, where I smoked the occasional cigar, while Patricia knit in the corner, and where I felt like the master of my own castle. Now with the door shut, and the air heavy with the smell of stale dust and neglect, it felt less like a room and more like a holding cell. The house was silent, but it was not the peaceful silence of the past. It was a hostile silence, the kind of silence that holds its breath before a scream. I shifted my weight, trying to find a comfortable position between the metal bar of the frame and the lumpy mattress. But comfort was a memory I left behind at the graveside. My body ached, not just from the arthritis that the rain always aggravated, but from a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that sleep could not touch. Above me, the floorboards creaked. It was a familiar sound, one I had heard 1,000 times over the decades. I knew every groan and whisper of this house. I knew that the 3rd step on the staircase squeaked in humid weather. I knew the radiator in the hallway hissed at exactly 2 in the morning. But the footsteps pacing back and forth in the master bedroom, directly above my head, did not belong to the rhythm of this house. They were heavy, agitated, and foreign. They belonged to Brad. My son-in-law was walking on the floor where I used to dance with my wife on our anniversaries. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image of him and Melissa moving their things into the closet, where Patricia's dresses still hung, pushing her scent out to make room for their ambition. I needed water. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of the cemetery dirt. I sat up the old sofa groaning in protest and swung my legs onto the cold, hardwood floor. I did not turn on the lamp. I did not want to see the boxes of my life stacked haphazardly in the corner like garbage awaiting pickup. I navigated the room by memory, my hand trailing along the wall for balance. I opened the door to the hallway and froze. The house was dark, but a sliver of light cut across the top of the stairs coming from the master bedroom door, which had been left slightly ajar. I should have gone to the kitchen. I should have poured myself a glass of tap water and retreated to my cage. But then I heard my name. He is finally asleep. Melissa's voice drifted down the stairs. It was not the voice of the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders at the zoo. It was a voice stripped of all softness, sharp and transactional. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister so hard my knuckles popped. I became a statue in the shadows, a ghost haunting his own home. "Are you sure?" Brad asked, his voice lower, but carrying that arrogant tone that always made my skin crawl. "Old people sleep light, especially when they are playing the victim." "He is out cold," Melissa replied. I heard him snoring. "God, that sofa smells terrible. We need to throw that out too once he is gone." "Once he is gone." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took a step up. Just one. The carpet muffled my bare foot. I needed to hear this. I needed to know the depth of the hole they were digging for me. "So did you look at the brochures I sent you?" Brad asked. The sound of a drawer opening and closing followed. I imagined him rummaging through my nightstand looking for watches or cufflinks to pocket. "I did," Melissa sighed. "The one in Sunnyvale looks okay. They have a garden." "Sunnyvale?" Brad scoffed. "Are you crazy, Mel? Do you know how much Sunnyvale costs? $4,000 a month. 4,000. That eats up his entire pension and Social Security, plus we would have to chip in. We are not doing that. We need that cash flow for the renovation if we want to flip this house by summer." Flip the house. My house. The house I built the deck for with my own 2 hands. The house Patricia loved. They were not planning to live here and care for me. They were planning to paint over our memories and sell them to the highest bidder. "Well, what about the other one?" Melissa asked, sounding defensive. "The Shady Pines place." "Now you are talking," Brad said. "I made a call today while you were crying at the grave. I got us a deal. $500 a month. It is a state-subsidized facility." 500, Melissa sounded doubtful. "That seems really low, Brad." "Is it clean?" "It is a roof and a bed," Brad snapped. "Look, your dad is confused. He is old. He won't know the difference between the Ritz-Carlton and a Motel 6 in a few months. The guy on the phone said they specialize in difficult cases. And let's be honest, Bill is going to be difficult. He is stubborn. He thinks he is still the man of the house. We need a place that can handle that." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Shady Pines. I knew that place. I had read about it in the local paper a year ago. There was an investigation. Reports of bed sores, medication errors, and elderly patients left sitting in their own waste for hours. It was not a care facility. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. "But Dad isn't senile," Melissa said, her voice dropping. "He is just grieving. Maybe we should wait a few months. Let him stabilize." "We don't have a few months." Brad's voice rose sharp and angry. "The investors for the crypto project need the capital by next month. We need to get power of attorney, get him declared incompetent if we have to, and liquidate this asset. We are drowning, Melissa. Do you want to go back to renting that shoebox apartment? Do you want to lose the BMW? Because that is what happens if we play the nice, dutiful children. We have to be realistic. Your dad had a good run. He lived a long life. It is our turn now. Our turn. As if life was a pie they could just snatch from my plate because they were too lazy to bake their own. I closed my eyes, listening to my daughter's silence. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say that I was her father, that I had paid for her college, that I had co-signed her first car loan, that I had held her hand through her divorce. Fine, Melissa finally whispered. Her voice was weak, defeated, and complicit. But you tell him. I can't look him in the eye and tell him we are sending him to a state home. I will handle Bill, Brad said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. I will tell him it is a luxury resort. I will tell him whatever he needs to hear to sign those papers. Tomorrow. We start tomorrow. Tonight, let the old man sleep on his lumpy sofa. Tomorrow we start the eviction process. I lowered my foot back to the floor. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not get my water. The thirst had been replaced by a different kind of burning in my throat, the acid taste of betrayal. I turned around and walked silently back to the den. I closed the door softly, turning the lock. It was a flimsy lock, one that could be kicked open with ease, but the click gave me a psychological barrier. I sat back down on the sofa in the dark. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from rage. I looked at the moonlight filtering through the dusty blinds. They thought I was a problem to be solved. They thought I was a lingering debt to be written off. They had calculated everything, the cost of the nursing home, the value of the house, the timeline of the sale. But they had miscalculated one thing. They had miscalculated me. I lay back down, pulling the thin, scratchy blanket up to my chin. I stared into the darkness, and for the first time since Patricia died, I did not cry. Tears are for the living, for those who have hope of being comforted. I had no hope of comfort from the people upstairs. I was alone. But as I listened to the house settle, hearing the distant sound of a siren wailing in the city, I realized something. Brad was right about one thing. It was time for a new chapter. But it would not be the chapter they were writing for me. They wanted to send me to a place where people go to die. They had no idea that tonight, in this dark, cramping room, listening to their greed seep through the floorboards, William Foster had just woken up. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I lay there and rehearsed the phone call I had received earlier. I replayed the landlord's voice in my head. Come over now. Don't tell your daughter. I waited for the sun to rise. I waited for the sound of their breathing to slow into deep sleep. I was not a prisoner anymore. I was a spy in enemy territory. And when dawn broke, the old man they thought they were discarding would be gone and the war would begin. The silence in the den was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like water at the bottom of a deep ocean. I sat there in the dark, clutching the thin blanket, my mind still reeling from the venomous words I had just heard drifting down from the master bedroom. They were planning to dispose of me. To them, I was just loose change stuck in the sofa cushions of their new life. Annoying, insignificant, and easily discarded. I looked at the small digital clock on the VCR player. It was 2:14 a.m., the witching hour. The time when regrets come to visit and ghosts feel most at home. On the small side table next to the urn that we had not yet decided where to place, Patricia's cell phone sat charging. I had kept it on. I told myself it was because there might be calls from distant relatives who hadn't heard the news. But the truth was, I just wanted to see her name light up one more time. I wanted to pretend she was just in the other room. Suddenly, the phone buzzed. It was a harsh, aggressive vibration against the wood of the table. In the dead silence of the house, it sounded like a jackhammer. My heart leaped into my throat. I lunged for the device, my hands trembling, terrified that the sound would wake Brad upstairs. If he came down and found me with the phone, he would take it. He would say I was being morbid, or worse, he would want to check her banking apps again. I grabbed the phone and stared at the screen. The blue light was blinding in the darkness. Unknown caller. Who calls a dead woman at 2 a.m? A scammer, a wrong number, or perhaps in my exhausted, grief-stricken state, I foolishly hoped it was her. I swiped the green icon and pressed the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened, holding my breath. On the other end, I heard the sound of a lighter flicking followed by a long, deep inhale. Then a voice. It was a man's voice, rough and textured like gravel grinding against concrete. It sounded like a voice that had spent a lifetime shouting over construction noise or whispering in back alleys. "Mrs. Foster," the voice asked. It was tentative, almost gentle, which clashed with the roughness of the tone. I cleared my throat, trying to find my own voice. "No," I rasped. "This is her husband. This is William." There was a long pause. I could hear the background noise on the other end, the distant wail of a police siren, the hum of a ventilation fan. "William," the man said. He did not sound surprised. He sounded resigned. "I saw the obituary. In the Times. I am sorry for your loss. She was a classy lady, one of the best." I frowned, my grip on the phone tightening. "Who are you?" "How did you know my wife? My name is Gianni," he said. "I am the landlord." The landlord. The word made no sense. It was like he had said he was the astronaut or the lion tamer. Patricia and I had owned our home on Elm Street for 40 years. We paid off the mortgage in '98. We never rented. We barely even stayed in hotels when we traveled, preferring to drive back home the same day to save money. "You have the wrong number, pal," I said, my voice hardening. "My wife didn't have a landlord. We own our home. Please do not call here again." I moved to hang up, but the man's voice came through sharp and quick like a command. "Do not hang up, William. Not if you want to know about apartment 404. I froze. The phone hovered an inch from my ear. "Apartment 404, he repeated slower this time. "Over on 4th and Main, the brick building with the green awning. She has been renting it for 6 years. Every month on the 1st she came by. Cash. Always cash. Crisp $100 bills in a white envelope." I slowly brought the phone back to my ear. My head was spinning. 6 years cash. We lived on a fixed income. My pension was modest. Patricia's Social Security was peanuts. We clipped coupons. We bought generic brands. Where would she get hundreds of dollars a month for an apartment in the city, and why? "You are lying," I whispered, but the conviction was draining out of me. "I wish I was," Gianni said. He sounded tired. "Listen, the lease expired yesterday. I went in to check the place to see if I needed to pack her stuff, and William. You need to see this." "See what I asked?" "What is in there, I can't explain it over the phone," he said. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. But there is a box on the table. It has your name on it. Just your name." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty room. A box with my name. "Why are you calling me now?" I asked. "Why didn't she tell me?" "I don't know," Gianni said. "She was private. Very private. She made me swear on my mother's grave that I would never send mail to your house. She was afraid." "Afraid? Afraid of what? Of me?" "No, not you," Gianni said, and his voice dropped an octave, becoming conspiratorial. "She was afraid of the vultures." The vultures. My eyes drifted upward to the ceiling toward the master bedroom, where my daughter and son-in-law were sleeping after plotting to sell my home. She told me, Gianni continued, that if anything ever happened to her, I was to call you. But she gave me a strict warning. She said, "Gianni, if Bill comes, tell him to come alone. Do not let Melissa know. Do not let that husband of hers know. Especially him." The mention of their names spoken by a stranger in the middle of the night shattered my last defense. This was real. This man knew my family. He knew the dynamic. He knew the fear that Patricia had apparently been living with for 6 years, a fear I had been too blind to see. "Where is it?" I asked. The Overlook Apartments, he said. 4th and Main. Apartment 404. I am here now. I will wait for you. But William, come now. I don't know how long I can keep this quiet. If the state finds out she had assets here, probate gets involved. You need to get here before the sun comes up. I looked at the door of the den. I looked at the hallway that led to the back door. I thought about my cane. I thought about the rain. I thought about the fact that I was 68 years old and supposed to be mourning. But curiosity is a powerful antidote to grief. And anger. Anger is a powerful fuel. I will be there in 30 minutes, I said. Good, Gianni said. Knock 3 times. And William, watch your back. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and sat there for a moment listening to the silence of the house. It felt different now. 10 minutes ago, I was a victim trapped in a cage. Now I was a man with a secret. Patricia had a life I didn't know about, a life she hid from me. Was it an affair? The thought stung, but I pushed it away. Patricia loved me. I knew that in my marrow. If she hid something, she did it for a reason. And if she hid it from Brad and Melissa, then whatever was in that apartment was a weapon. And I needed a weapon. I stood up. My knees popped, but the pain felt distant. I did not turn on the light. I felt my way to the chair where I had draped my damp coat. I slipped it on. It was still cold and smelled of the graveyard, but I didn't care. I grabbed my cane. I grabbed Patricia's phone and shoved it into my pocket. I opened the den door, moving slower than I ever had in my life. I crept into the hallway. The floorboards settled under my weight. I held my breath. Upstairs, I heard a toilet flush, then footsteps. Brad. I froze in the shadow of the staircase. If he came down for a glass of water, if he saw me dressed and ready to leave at 2:30 a.m., it would be over. He would stop me. He would question me. He would find out. I pressed myself against the wall, merging with the darkness. The footsteps paused at the top of the stairs. I could hear him breathing. I could almost smell his arrogance. Then the footsteps turned back. A door closed. The bed springs creaked upstairs. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I moved to the back door, unlocked the deadbolt with agonizing slowness, click, 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 and stepped out into the night. The rain had turned into a mist. The streetlights created halos in the fog. I didn't look back at the house. I walked toward the main road to catch the night bus, clutching the address in my mind like a lifeline. 4th and Main. Apartment 404. Whatever was waiting for me there was either going to destroy me or save me. And as I limped through the wet darkness, I had a strange feeling that Patricia was walking right beside me, whispering, "Go get them, Bill. Go get them." The brass deadbolt was cold under my fingers, a stark contrast to the clammy sweat that had broken out on my palms. I turned the lock millimeter by millimeter, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to since the funeral that the old mechanism would not screech. The house was silent, but it was a deceptive silence, the kind that amplifies every heartbeat and every creak of a floorboard. Click. The sound was barely a whisper, but to my heightened senses, it sounded like a gunshot echoing through the hallway. I froze my hand, still gripping the knob, my eyes darting toward the ceiling. I held my breath, waiting for the thud of heavy footsteps, waiting for Brad's voice to boom down the stairs, demanding to know what I was doing. 5 seconds passed, then 10. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator and the wind battering the siding outside. They were still asleep. I pushed the door open just wide enough to slip my body through. The night air hit me like a physical blow, wet and biting, carrying the scent of damp pine and decaying leaves. I stepped out onto the small wooden porch, closing the door behind me with the precision of a bomb defusal expert. As the latch clicked into place, I realized I had just locked myself out of the home I had built, but strangely, I did not feel fear. I felt the first stirring of liberation. I navigated the backyard by memory, avoiding the loose paver stone near the rose bushes that always clattered when stepped on. The rain had turned the lawn into a sponge. My cane sank deep into the mud with every step making a sucking sound that made me wince. I kept to the shadows, hugging the perimeter of the fence, terrified that the motion sensor floodlight over the garage would trigger. If that light went on, it would illuminate the yard like a prison break. I moved with a painful, awkward urgency, my arthritis flaring in the damp cold, shooting spikes of fire through my knees. But pain was irrelevant now. Pain was just a reminder that I was still alive and capable of moving. I reached the side gate and unlatched it, slipping out onto the sidewalk. The street was deserted. Under the orange glow of the streetlights, the familiar neighborhood looked alien and hostile. The houses of neighbors I had known for decades were dark, their windows like unblinking eyes watching my escape. I pulled my collar up against the drizzle and began the 3-block trudge to the bus stop on the main avenue. I could not take the car. The sound of the engine starting would have been a siren song to Brad. I had to do this the hard way, the invisible way. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, making me jump, but I kept my head down, focusing on the rhythm of my cane hitting the pavement. Click, step, drag. Click, step, drag. I felt like a fugitive, a criminal fleeing the scene of a crime, but the only crime I had committed was trusting the wrong people with my heart. By the time I reached the bus shelter, my chest was heaving and my legs were trembling from the exertion. I collapsed onto the metal bench, checking the time on Patricia's phone. It was 2:48 a.m. The night bus to downtown was due in 4 minutes. When the bus finally rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the fog, I felt a surge of relief so profound it nearly brought me to tears. The doors hissed open, and I climbed aboard, fumbling for the change I had scraped together from my coat pockets. The driver, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, looked me up and down. He took in my mud-splattered shoes, my wet hair, and the cane. He didn't ask where an old man was going at 3 a.m. He just nodded a silent acknowledgement of the shared misery of the night shift. I moved to the back of the bus and sat by the window. As the vehicle lurched forward, I watched my neighborhood disappear into the rain-streaked darkness. I was leaving behind the safety of the known for the danger of the truth. My hand went to my pocket, clutching the piece of paper with the address. Overlook Apartments, Apartment 404. I closed my eyes and let the vibration of the engine settle into my bones. There was no turning back now. The William Foster who signed checks and kept the peace was gone. The man sitting on that bus was someone else entirely, someone forged in the cold fire of betrayal, and he was ready to burn the whole world down to find the truth. The night bus hissed to a halt at the corner of 4th and Main, the air brakes sighing like a dying animal. I stepped off onto the cracked pavement, my cane striking the wet concrete with a hollow thud. Chinatown at 3 a.m. was a different world from the manicured lawns of my suburban cul-de-sac. Here, the neon signs buzzed with an erratic, epileptic rhythm, casting pools of sickly red and yellow light onto the trash-strewn sidewalks. The air smelled of old frying oil, wet cardboard, and the metallic tang of the nearby harbor. I pulled my coat collar up to my ears, trying to make myself small, trying to look less like a target and more like just another shadow in a city full of them. I looked up at the building in front of me. The Overlook Apartments. The name was a cruel joke. It did not overlook anything but a grimy alleyway and a dumpster overflowing with restaurant waste. It was a brick monstrosity that had likely been condemned twice and ignored 3 times. The windows were grime-streaked eyes, some boarded up with plywood, others glowing with the blue light of televisions that never turned off. Graffiti crawled up the lower walls like a colorful fungus. My heart sank. This was where Patricia came. My Patricia, who ironed her bedsheets and wouldn't leave the house without a pearl necklace, the idea that she would voluntarily step foot in this decaying tomb once a month for 6 years seemed impossible. I checked the slip of paper again, hoping I had misread the address, but the ink hadn't changed. I approached the entrance. The glass of the front door was cracked, held together by yellowing tape. A figure detached itself from the shadows of the vestibule. I gripped my cane, ready to swing, my old muscles tensing. "Mr. Foster," the figure rasped. It was the voice from the phone. I squinted into the gloom. A man stepped forward into the harsh light of a flickering street lamp. Gianni looked exactly like his voice sounded. He was short, but built like a fire hydrant, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite with a dull chisel. He wore a faded army jacket and a flat cap pulled low over eyes that were surprisingly kind. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a ring of keys. "You look like hell, William," he said, not unkindly. "I feel like it," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Is this the place?" Gianni nodded and spit on the ground. "This is the shell. The pearl is inside. Follow me. And watch your step on the 3rd floor landing. The wood is rotter than a politician's promise." He unlocked the door, and we stepped into a lobby that smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been taped there during the Reagan administration. We took the stairs. The climb was brutal on my knees, a slow, agonizing ascent through layers of smells and sounds. On the 2nd floor, a dog barked aggressively behind a thin door. On the 3rd floor, a couple was arguing in a language I didn't understand. "Why here?" I asked, pausing to catch my breath on the landing, my hand clutching the sticky banister. "Why would she choose this place? Because nobody looks for treasure in a landfill," Gianni said over his shoulder. "Your wife was smarter than both of us combined, William. She knew that the best place to hide something valuable is inside something ugly." We reached the 4th floor. It was quieter here, the air still and heavy. We walked down a long, dimly lit corridor until we reached the end. Apartment 404. The door was different from the others. It wasn't cheap particle board. It was solid steel, painted to look like wood, with 3 heavy-duty deadbolts lined up like brass soldiers. Gianni stopped. He looked at me, his expression solemn. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded, though I wasn't. He turned the keys. 1, 2, 3 clicks. 3. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped aside to let me pass. I stepped across the threshold and stopped dead. I thought I had walked into a portal. I thought I had stepped out of Seattle and into a different century. The smell hit me first. It wasn't cabbage or garbage. It was the rich, intoxicating scent of lemon oil, beeswax, old paper, and lavender. Patricia's smell. The room was not an apartment. It was a sanctuary. The dirty windows were covered with heavy velvet blackout curtains that completely sealed off the grim reality of the street outside. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with custom-built mahogany shelves filled with books, hundreds of them, on art history, metallurgy, and horology. In the center of the room stood a massive workbench made of solid oak, illuminated by a high-end magnifying lamp that cost more than my first car. But it was what was on the shelves and the tables that made my knees give out. Clocks. Dozens of them. Intricate gilded French mantel clocks from the 18th century. German cuckoo clocks with carvings so delicate they looked like lace. A grandfather clock in the corner that looked like it belonged in a museum. And jewelry. Trays of it. Not the costume jewelry she wore at home, but heavy antique pieces, emeralds missing settings, gold chains waiting to be repaired, silver brooches black with tarnish waiting for her touch. "My God," I whispered. "She wasn't just renting a room," William Gianni said softly, closing the door behind us and locking the world out. "She was working. She was one of the best restoration experts on the West Coast. Dealers from San Francisco to Vancouver sent her their hopeless cases. They knew her as the ghost. They never met her. They just sent the broken pieces to a P.O. box, and 3 weeks later, they got back a masterpiece. I walked over to the workbench. Her tools were laid out with surgical precision. Tiny tweezers, screwdrivers the size of needles, jars of solvents labeled in her neat looping handwriting. There was a half-finished job on the vise, a pocket watch, that looked like it had been crushed. She had been piecing the gears back together. I ran my hand over the wood of the bench. It was smooth, worn down by her hands. My wife. The woman who told me she was going to the mall. The woman who let Brad make fun of her for being just a housewife. She had been coming here to this secret kingdom and performing magic. I felt a surge of pride so intense it hurt, followed immediately by a crushing wave of guilt. I didn't know I had lived with her for 40 years, and I didn't know she was a genius. I had let her dim her light to keep the peace with our mediocre children. "Look at the wall," Gianni said, pointing to a corkboard above the desk. I looked. Pinned to the board were photos, not of clocks. Photos of me. A photo of me sleeping in my recliner. A photo of me gardening. A photo of me and her at the beach 20 years ago. And in the center, a handwritten note on a yellow sticky pad. For our trip to Italy. 120 more hours of work. She was doing this for us. She was slaving away in this hidden room, breathing in solvent fumes, fixing broken things, so she could fix our broken retirement. I turned to Gianni, tears streaming down my face. "She did all this." "Alone," Gianni nodded. "She didn't want you to worry. And she didn't want them to take it. She told me once, 'Gianni, if I bring this money home, Brad will find a way to invest it in a swamp and Melissa will buy a boat. This is for Bill. Only for Bill.'" He walked over to a small safe in the corner of the room. He spun the dial. "She changed the combination last week," he said. "It is your birthday." He pulled the heavy door open. Inside there were stacks of papers, a thick ledger, and the iPad he had mentioned on the phone. But what caught my eye was a simple shoebox wrapped in brown paper sitting on top of the cash. Written on the paper in black marker were 3 words. "Start living, Bill." I reached for the box. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I untied the string. Inside, nestling on a bed of velvet, was a watch. It was a Patek Philippe, vintage, gold, restored to perfection, and next to it, a bank book. I opened the book. The numbers blurred in my vision. Deposits, monthly deposits, 5,000, 8,000, 12,000. The final balance at the bottom of the page was not a number my brain could comprehend. $3.2 million. I gasped, clutching the edge of the workbench for support. The room spun. The smell of lavender became overwhelming. "She was rich," I whispered. "We were rich." "She was rich," Gianni corrected. "But she lived like a pauper because she was terrified of her own children. That is the tragedy, William. She built this empire in the shadows so the sun wouldn't burn it down." He picked up the iPad and handed it to me. "But the money isn't the weapon, William. This is." She started recording these a year ago, when she got sick. She knew something was wrong, and she knew who was making it worse. I took the device. It felt heavy cold. "What is on this?" I asked. "The truth," Gianni said. "And the truth is going to hurt, but it is the only thing that can set you free. Watch the last one. The one dated 2 days before she died." I sat down on the stool where Patricia had spent thousands of hours. I looked around this magnificent hidden world she had created amidst the squalor of Chinatown. I realized then that my wife was not just a victim. She was a grandmaster playing a long game, and she had just passed the pieces to me. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. Patricia's face appeared. She looked tired, pale, but her eyes were fierce. "Hello, my love," the digital Patricia said. If you are watching this, it means the wolves are at the door. But don't worry, Bill. I left you a shotgun. I looked up at Gianni. He wasn't smiling. He was waiting. Lock the door, I said. Gianni clicked the deadbolt shut. I'm watching it. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly the silence of the room was filled with the sound of her breathing. It was not the shallow, rattled breathing of her final days in the hospital, the sound that had haunted my nightmares for the past week. It was the steady, calm rhythm of the woman I had married 40 years ago. There she was. Patricia. She was sitting right where I was sitting now at this very workbench, wearing her magnification loops on her forehead, like a tiara made of glass and steel. Behind her on the shelf, I could see the calendar. The date was 3 years ago. Her hair was still dark, untouched by the gray that the stress of the last year had brought. She looked at the camera lens, and it felt like she was looking directly into my soul. "Hello, my love," the digital Patricia said. Her voice was warm like a fire on a rainy night. "If you are watching this, it means I am gone. And if you are watching this, it means Gianni kept his promise. I hope you are sitting down, Bill. I know you. You are probably standing there with your cane trying to be strong, trying to figure out the structural integrity of this situation, because that is what you do. You fix things, but you cannot fix what is about to happen. You just have to witness it." I reached out and touched the cold glass of the iPad, tracing the line of her cheek. My throat was so tight, I could barely breathe. She adjusted the camera, her hands moving with the grace I had seen her use to chop vegetables or fold laundry, but here her hands were holding a screwdriver the size of a needle. "I started this video diary because I needed someone to talk to," she continued. "I couldn't talk to you, Bill. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But you are too good. You have a blind spot the size of a continent when it comes to Melissa. You see the little girl in pigtails who scraped her knee. I see the woman who stole $40 from your wallet last Thanksgiving while you were carving the turkey." I gasped. I remembered that Thanksgiving. I thought I had lost the money. I spent 3 hours retracing my steps, feeling like a senile fool. Patricia had helped me look soothing, me telling me it was okay. She knew the whole time. I swiped to the next video. The timestamp was 6 months later. Patricia looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes. She was holding a piece of paper, a medical bill. "They came over today," she said to the camera, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Brad and Melissa, they didn't come to visit. They came to scout." Brad walked around the living room, tapping the walls, talking about load-bearing beams. He asked me if we had ever considered a reverse mortgage. He said, "Mom, you and Dad are sitting on a gold mine. You should cash out and enjoy life." Enjoy life, he meant give the money to him for that ridiculous cryptocurrency scheme. She paused, taking a sip of tea from a chipped mug, the one Melissa had given her for Mother's Day 10 years ago, the only gift she had received in a decade. "I told him no," Patricia said, her eyes hardening. "I told him this house is your legacy. It is where we raised them." And do you know what he said, Bill? He laughed. He looked at Melissa and laughed. He said, "Legacy doesn't pay for a Lexus, Mom." I watched as the Patricia on the screen wiped a tear from her cheek. "I wanted to scream at them," she whispered. "I wanted to open this safe and show them the $300,000 I made last year, restoring a 17th century grandfather clock for the museum in Vienna. I wanted to throw the money in their faces and scream, 'Is this enough legacy for you?' But I didn't. Because if they knew Bill, if they knew I was the ghost, the mysterious restorer that the auction houses bid wars over, they wouldn't love me. They would consume me. They would pick my bones clean before my body was even cold. The ghost." The name echoed in the room. I looked around at the clocks ticking softly on the shelves. My wife was a legend in a world I didn't even know existed. While I was worrying about the electric bill, she was saving masterpieces. I clicked on another video. This one was dated last winter, the night of the blizzard. I remembered that night. The heating system had failed. The house was freezing. I had called Brad because he had a friend in HVAC. "Remember the heater, Bill?" Patricia asked the camera. She was wrapped in a shawl, shivering slightly in the recording. "You called Brad. You begged him for help. He told you his truck was stuck in the snow. He told you to pile on blankets, and he would come in the morning." She leaned closer to the lens, her expression cold and terrifying. "I tracked his phone bill. I installed the family locator app on his phone when he was drunk at Christmas. He wasn't stuck in the snow. He was at a bar. He was at the Rusty Anchor watching the playoffs. He sat there drinking beer and eating wings while his 65-year-old parents froze in their own home." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I remembered huddling with her under 3 quilts that night, rubbing her cold hands, feeling like a failure, because I couldn't keep my wife warm. And he was drinking beer. "That was the night I raised my rates," Patricia said, her voice turning to steel. "The next morning I took a job restoring a Faberge egg for a private collector in Dubai. I charged him double, and I put every cent of that $50,000 into the account. Not for us. For you. Because I realized that night, Bill, that when I am gone, there will be no one to keep you warm. They will leave you to freeze. So I am building you a fire. A fire made of money." I sobbed, a raw guttural sound that tore out of my chest. She was protecting me. All those hours she spent at the library or volunteering, she was here under these lights, ruining her eyesight to build a fortress around me. I swiped again. The videos were becoming painful to watch, but I couldn't stop. It was like pulling shrapnel out of a wound. This one was from 3 months ago. Patricia looked frail. Her skin was pale, papery. She was holding a bottle of pills. My heart stopped. It was her heart medication. "They are doing it again," she said. Her voice was a whisper now. I noticed my pills looked different. The generic brand. But the bottle says the brand name. I called the pharmacy. They said they dispensed the correct ones. But these are chalky. She held the pill up to the camera. "I think Melissa is swapping them, Bill. I think she is taking my medication to use or sell and replacing it with cheap supplements. I feel it in my chest. The palpitations are getting worse. I asked her about it yesterday. She told me I was crazy. She told me I was getting senile like you. She said, 'Mom, you are forgetting things. Just take your pills and stop complaining.'" The Patricia on the screen began to cry, her composure finally breaking. "I am scared, Bill. I am scared of my own daughter. I am sitting here in a room full of millions of dollars of inventory, and I am afraid to eat the food she brings over. I am afraid to sleep when she is in the house. I should tell you. I know I should. But if I tell you, you will confront them. And Brad is dangerous, Bill. He is desperate. If he knows, we know he might hurt you. And I can't risk that. I would rather die a little sooner than risk you getting hurt." I slammed my fist onto the workbench. The pain shot up my arm, but it was nothing compared to the rage exploding in my brain. They were killing her. They were slowly, systematically killing my wife to accelerate their inheritance. And she took it. She absorbed their poison to keep me safe. I watched the final video. It was dated 2 days before the heart attack that took her. She was wearing her favorite blue dress. She had done her hair. She looked like she was ready for church. "This is it, Bill," she said softly. "I can feel it. My arm has been numb all morning. I am not going to the hospital. Not yet. I need to finish the mechanism on the Swiss railway clock. It is the last piece." She smiled a sad, heartbreaking smile. "There is a letter in the safe. It explains how to access the offshore accounts. It explains how to contact the auction houses. They know me as P. Vance. They don't know I am a woman. You will have to handle that surprise. She leaned in and kissed the camera lens. Don't let them have the house, Bill. Burn it down if you have to, but don't let them have it. And don't let them have you. You are William Foster. You built skyscrapers. You built bridges. You are the strongest man I know. Stop being a father to them. They stopped being your children a long time ago. Be the man I fell in love with. Be the man who fights. She took a deep breath. I love you, Bill. I will be waiting for you. But take your time. Go to Italy. Go to the Amalfi Coast. Drink the wine we talked about. Sit by the ocean. And when you look at the sunset, know that I am sitting right there with you, finally resting. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of the room, the tears drying on my face, turning into a tight mask on my skin. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my gut, but around it something else was growing. Something hot and hard and sharp. I looked at the clocks on the wall. They were all ticking in unison. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It sounded like a countdown. I looked at the safe. I looked at the ledger. $3.2 million. They thought I was a senile old man. They thought I was a burden. They thought they could swap my wife's pills and sell my home and throw me into a warehouse to rot. I stood up. I picked up the iPad and slid it into my coat pocket. It felt heavy like a loaded gun. Patricia was right. I had spent 40 years building bridges, trying to connect people, trying to hold things together. But some things don't deserve to be fixed. Some things need to be demolished. I turned to Gianni, who was standing in the shadows, his cap in his hands, wiping his eyes. You saw it, I asked. I saw it. He nodded. Do you have a lawyer, I asked. A real one. Not a strip mall ambulance chaser like the one Brad uses. I want a shark. I want someone who can smell blood in the water from 3 miles away. Gianni smiled a slow, grim smile that showed his gold tooth. I know a guy, he said. He represents the union. He eats guys like Brad for breakfast and spits out the bones. Call him, I said, grabbing my cane. And tell him to meet us. We have a party to prepare for. I looked one last time at the workbench at the half-finished pocket watch. I reached out and gently closed the vise. Work is over, Patricia, I whispered to the empty room. It is time for the eviction. My hand hovered over the last video file on the screen. The timestamp read October 14th, 2 days before the ambulance came, 2 days before my world ended. I pressed play, and the image of my wife filled the screen one last time. But this was not the Patricia I knew. This was a woman who was terrified, a woman who was looking over her shoulder even in her own sanctuary. She was holding 2 orange prescription bottles up to the camera lens. Her hands were shaking so bad, the pills inside rattled like dry bones. Look closely, Bill, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. This bottle on the left is the one I picked up from the pharmacy. Digoxin, brand name. It is coated small and has a specific imprint. Now look at this bottle. This is the one I found in my nightstand drawer yesterday morning. She poured the pills from the second bottle onto the black velvet mat of her workbench. They looked similar, almost identical to the untrained eye. But Patricia was a restorer. She spent her life looking at the microscopic details of things. She zoomed the camera in. The imprint is wrong, she said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. And the texture is chalky. I analyzed a sample here in the lab. It is not heart medication, Bill. It is a cheap diuretic mixed with caffeine powder. It is poison. Not the kind that kills you instantly, but the kind that makes a weak heart work too hard until it just stops. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I gagged, clapping a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. They were not just waiting for her to die. They were accelerating it. They were murdering her by inches, day by day, pill by pill. I checked the hidden camera I installed in the kitchen. Patricia continued wiping her face with the back of her hand. I saw him, Bill. I saw Brad. Tuesday night while you were watching the game, and I was in the bath. He was at the counter. He emptied my prescription into a Ziploc bag and filled the bottle with these fakes. And Melissa, she was standing right there. She asked him if he was sure it would look natural, and he said, "It will just look like her heart gave out. Old engines fail, babe. Old engines fail." The video ended. The screen went black, leaving me staring at my own reflection. A reflection of a man who had slept under the same roof as monsters. A man who had let those monsters carry his wife's casket. A man who had poured coffee for his son-in-law this morning, the same hands that had swapped the life-saving medicine for poison. The grief that had been weighing me down for a week, the heavy suffocating blanket of sadness, suddenly evaporated. In its place, something else rushed in. It was hot, white, and blinding. It was a rage so pure, so absolute, that I felt my vision sharpen. The arthritis in my knees, the fatigue in my back, the tremors in my hands. It all vanished. I stood up. I did not need the cane. I picked it up and smashed it against the workbench. The wood splintered with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "They killed her," I said. My voice did not sound like mine. It sounded like grinding metal. Gianni stepped out of the shadows. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. He had watched the video over my shoulder. I suspected he whispered, crossing himself. But I never thought, "Jesus, William, we have to call the police. Right now. We have the evidence. They will arrest them tonight." "No," I said. Gianni looked at me confused. "No, William, this is murder. If we call the police now," I said, turning to face him, "they will get a lawyer. They will get bail. They will drag this out in court for 2 years. They will claim Patricia was paranoid, that she tampered with the pills herself. They will spin a story. And even if they go to jail, it will be quiet. It will be clinical." I walked over to the safe and grabbed the stack of cash. I grabbed the ledger. I grabbed the iPad. "I don't want quiet," I hissed. "I want to destroy them. I want to strip them naked in front of the world. I want to take away the only thing they care about more than their freedom. I want to take away their reputation. I want to take away their greed. I want them to think they have won everything, and then I want to watch their faces when the floor drops out from under them." I looked at the date on the calendar. "Tomorrow is Saturday," I said. "Brad wants to throw a party. He wants to invite his investors. He wants to celebrate the house sale. He wants me to sign the power of attorney in front of his rich friends to prove he is a big shot." Gianni nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "We are going to give him his party," I said. "But we need to make some preparations. You said you know a lawyer, a shark." "The biggest shark in Seattle," Gianni said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Call him," I ordered. "Wake him up. Tell him we have a case that will make him famous." "And Gianni, do you have a suit?" "I have one for funerals," he said. "Wear it," I said. "Tomorrow night you are not the landlord. You are my financial advisor. And we are going to crash a wedding between my son-in-law and his ego." I looked back at the blank screen of the iPad. I promised Patricia I would burn it down. I was going to keep that promise. I was going to set a fire that would leave nothing but ash and justice. "Let's go," I said, buttoning my coat. "I have to go back to that house. I have to look that man in the eye and pretend I don't know he is a murderer. I have to cook him breakfast. I have to play the part of the senile old fool one last time. Because when the curtain falls tomorrow night, there will be no applause, only handcuffs." The bus ride back to the suburbs felt like a journey between 2 different dimensions. I had left the city as a man armed with the truth, a man possessing a secret arsenal of wealth and evidence. But as the familiar streets of my neighborhood came into view, bathed in the gray, washed-out light of a drizzly Saturday morning, I knew I had to shed that armor. I had to shrink. I had to become the trembling, confused, broken old man that Brad and Melissa needed me to be. I stepped off the bus 2 blocks from the house. I leaned heavily on my cane, not because I needed to, but because I was rehearsing. I rolled my shoulders forward, compressing my chest to make myself look smaller, more fragile. I practiced a tremor in my right hand. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every fiber of my being wanted to march up that driveway, kick down the front door, and roar the truth into their faces. But I remembered Patricia's voice from the video. Be the man who fights. And in this war, the best fight was a perfect deception. When I reached the driveway, I saw that Brad's BMW was parked crookedly, taking up 2 spots. It was a small detail, a petty display of dominance, asserting that this territory was already his. I walked past the spot where the junk truck had been the day before. The mud was still churned up where they had dragged Patricia's sewing table. I forced myself to look at it, using the fresh spike of pain to fuel the tears I needed for my performance. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled of bacon and fresh coffee. It was a domestic smell, a happy smell, which made the reality of the situation even more nauseating. They were in the kitchen. I could hear the clinking of silverware and the low hum of the morning news on the television. I shuffled down the hallway, dragging my feet slightly on the hardwood floor so they would hear me coming. I paused at the kitchen doorway. Brad was sitting at the head of the table, my seat. He was wearing a silk robe that I had never seen before, likely bought with the money he siphoned from my wife's accounts. He was reading a tablet, a half-eaten plate of eggs in front of him. Melissa was at the counter pouring juice. She looked tired, her hair messy, but there was a nervous energy about her. Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence, Brad said without looking up. Melissa turned around. Her eyes narrowed instantly. Where have you been, Dad? She asked, her voice sharp. We woke up and the back door was unlocked. Brad thought you wandered off and got lost. We were about to call the police. She was lying. They weren't going to call the police. They were probably hoping I had walked into traffic. I stood there, letting my coat drip onto the floor. I let my chin tremble. I looked from Brad to Melissa, and then I let my gaze drop to the floor, the picture of defeat. I went for a walk. Stammered, making my voice sound thin and reedy. I couldn't sleep. The sofa, it hurts my back. And I missed your mother. I raised my hand to wipe away a genuine tear, though they didn't know the source of it. Brad finally looked up. He scanned me with a look of distaste, like I was a wet dog that had wandered onto his expensive rug. A walk in the rain. At 3 a.m, Brad scoffed, picking up his coffee mug. You are lucky you didn't catch pneumonia, Bill. Although considering the state of your health insurance, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing for the budget. Brad, Melissa hissed, but it was a half-hearted reprimand. She walked over to me, but she didn't hug me. She stopped 3 feet away, crossing her arms. You can't just disappear like that, Dad. It is irresponsible. We have a lot to do today. We can't be chasing you around the neighborhood. I know, I whispered. I moved to the table and pulled out a chair, not my chair, but the guest chair on the side. I sat down slowly, letting out a long, pained groan as my knees bent. I know, Melissa, and I am sorry. The room went silent. They weren't expecting an apology. They were expecting a fight. They were expecting the stubborn, proud William Foster who had yelled at the movers yesterday. You are sorry, Brad asked, putting his tablet down. He looked suspicious, his shark eyes narrowing. I nodded, staring at my hands on the table. I did a lot of thinking last night, I said. Walking in the rain, it clears the head. And I realized something. You were right. Brad exchanged a glance with Melissa. I could practically hear their heartbeats speed up. Right about what Bill, Brad asked, leaning forward. About everything I said, looking up at him, with what I hoped was a look of total surrender. I am old, Brad. I am tired. Since Patricia died, I feel like half of me is gone. I can't take care of this house. The roof needs work. The property taxes are coming due. It is too much for one man. I took a shaky breath. I don't want to be a burden, I continued. I don't want to be the stubborn old man who ruins his children's future because he can't let go of the past. If you really think selling the house is the best thing, then I won't fight you anymore. Melissa dropped the carton of juice. It hit the counter with a thud. You mean it? She asked, her voice breathless. You will sell. I will do better than that, I said. I will sign the house over to you. Today. You can sell it, flip it, rent it, whatever you want. I just want to rest. You mentioned that place. Shady Pines. If they have a bed, I will take it. I just don't want to be alone in this big house anymore. It is full of ghosts. A slow, predatory smile spread across Brad's face. It was the smile of a gambler who had just been handed a royal flush by an idiot opponent. He stood up and walked over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It took every ounce of my willpower not to grab a steak knife and stab it into his hand. Now you are talking sense, Bill, he said, his voice dripping with fake warmth. I knew you were a reasonable man. This is the best decision for everyone. Really. We are going to take such good care of you. He looked at Melissa. Get the papers, babe. The ones the lawyer emailed yesterday. Print them out. Now. Before he changes his mind. Melissa scrambled toward the home office like a rat chasing a piece of cheese. I heard the printer whirring to life a few seconds later. Brad sat back down looking at me with a new expression. It wasn't respect. It was ownership. You know, Bill, he said, leaning back in his chair and putting his feet up on the empty seat next to him. This is going to be great. I have some investors coming into town next week. With the equity from this place, I can finally buy into that commercial zoning project downtown. We are going to be rich. And don't worry, I will make sure you have extra Jell-O cups at the nursing home. He laughed. A cruel, barking laugh. I forced a weak smile. There is just one thing, Brad, I said softly. He stopped laughing, his eyes snapping back to me. What is it? You are not backing out, are you? No. I said quickly. No, I have a request. A small one. What he asked, impatient now. If I am leaving, if this is the end of my time in this house, I want to say goodbye properly. I want to see our friends, the neighbors, your business partners. I looked him in the eye. I want you to host a dinner tonight, I said. A big one. Invite everyone. Let's make it a celebration. A celebration of your success, Brad. You can announce the house transfer. You can announce your new project. I just want to sit there and see everyone one last time before I go to Shady Pines. Brad stared at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was evaluating the risk. But then his vanity took over. He imagined it. He imagined a room full of people toasting him. He imagined showing off his conquest. He imagined the envy in his friends' eyes when he announced he had acquired a $2 million property for free. A party, he mused. A retirement party for you, and a launch party for me. Exactly, I said. I will pay for the catering. I have a little cash left in my checking account. Use it all. I won't need it where I am going. That sealed it. The idea of spending my last dime to celebrate his victory was too delicious for him to resist. You got it, Bill, he said, clapping his hands together. We will do it tonight. I will get on the phone. I will get the best catering in the city. We will pop champagne. This is going to be legendary. Melissa came running back into the room, clutching a stack of warm papers. Here she panted, slamming them onto the table in front of me. Power of attorney. Deed transfer. Asset liquidation authorization. Just sign where the sticky notes are." She shoved a pen into my hand. I looked at the papers. I looked at the pen. I looked at the faces of the two people who were supposed to love me. They were vibrating with greed. They were practically salivating. I picked up the pen. My hand shook, but this time it wasn't acting. It was the adrenaline of the hunter setting the snare. "I will sign," I said. "But not now." Brad's smile faltered. "What, at the party?" I said firmly. "Tonight, in front of everyone. I want to make a speech. I want to tell everyone how much you have done for me. And then I will sign. It will be the highlight of the evening." Brad looked at Melissa. Melissa looked at Brad. They were impatient, but the allure of a public spectacle, of a public validation of their dominance was too strong. "Fine, Brad said, snatching the pen back. "Tonight. But if you pull any stunts, Bill, if you hesitate for 1 second, I will drive you to Shady Pines myself and leave you on the curb." "I won't hesitate," I promised. "I am ready for this to be over." "Good," Brad said. "Now go take a shower. You smell like wet dog and old age. We have guests coming in 12 hours. I stood up, using the table for support. I walked out of the kitchen, listening to them immediately burst into excited chatter behind me. They were talking about hiring a DJ. They were talking about ordering lobster. They were talking about which wall they would knock down first. I climbed the stairs to the second floor to take a shower. I walked past the master bedroom, my bedroom, and saw their suitcases exploded all over the floor. I went into the guest bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower to mask the sound. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red. My face was pale. But the man looking back at me wasn't defeated. He was terrifying. I pulled Patricia's phone out of my pocket. I had one text message to send. "Gianni, it's a go. The party is tonight at 7 p.m. Bring the lawyer, and bring the police." I hit send. Then I stepped into the hot water, washing away the mud of the grave and the grime of the city. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw. I was washing away the victim. When I walked down those stairs tonight, I wouldn't be William the widower. I would be the executioner. And the feast was about to begin. The house transformed within hours, shifting from a place of mourning into a stage for Brad's vanity. It was nauseating to watch. As soon as I retreated to the guest room, I could hear the chaos erupting downstairs. It wasn't the chaotic energy of family or joy. It was the frantic, desperate energy of a con artist trying to set the scene for his greatest heist. Brad was on the phone constantly. His voice boomed through the thin floorboards, projecting an image of success that was entirely fabricated. I heard him calling his so-called investors. These were men I had met briefly in the past, men with slicked-back hair and firm handshakes, who spoke in buzzwords like synergy and leverage, men who had likely fleeced Brad on previous ventures, but kept him around because he was an easy mark. But today, the dynamic was different. Today, Brad was the one holding the golden ticket. "Jerry, you have to come tonight," I heard Brad shout into his phone. "No, cancel the dinner reservation. Trust me. I am closing the deal of the century. The Elm Street property. Yes, the whole thing. The old man is signing it over. Total liquidation. I need you there to witness the asset transfer so we can move on the downtown project Monday morning. This is it, Jerry. We are going to be kings." Kings. He called himself a king while living in a house paid for by his father-in-law, wearing clothes washed by his mother-in-law, and plotting to exile the man who built the roof over his head. Around noon, there was a knock on my door. I didn't answer immediately. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, breathing deeply to keep my heart rate steady. The role I was playing required absolute submission, and every time I heard his voice, my fists clenched involuntarily. "Open up," Bill Brad's voice came through the wood. "We have business." I shuffled to the door and opened it. Brad was standing there, already showered and shaved. He smelled of expensive cologne, a scent that was too sharp, too aggressive, like chemical pine. He held out his hand, palm up. "Your debit card," he said. I looked at his hand, then at his face. He didn't even have the decency to ask. He demanded. "The caterers need a deposit," he explained, his tone bored. "And Melissa needs to pick up some decorations. We want this to look professional. Unless you have $5,000 in cash under your mattress, I need the card." I reached for my wallet on the dresser. My hands trembled, partially from age, but mostly from the sheer effort of not punching him in the throat. I pulled out the card, the one linked to the joint checking account I had shared with Patricia. The account that held our meager savings, the rainy day fund we had built over 40 years of skipping vacations and eating leftovers. I handed it to him. "Be careful," I whispered, keeping my eyes on the floor. "That is all I have left, Brad." He snatched the card from my fingers with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Don't worry, Bill," he said, tucking it into his pocket. "Think of it as an investment. You are investing in your legacy. Besides, where you are going, you won't need money. The state covers the basics at Shady Pines. You will have 3 squares a day and a bed. What else does a guy your age need?" He turned and walked away, whistling. I closed the door and leaned against it. "Empty it," I thought. "Go ahead, Brad. Drain it dry. Buy the lobster. Buy the champagne. Every dollar you spend today is another year added to your sentence." By 3 o'clock, the house was unrecognizable. A catering van had pulled into the driveway, blocking my view of the street. Strangers in black uniforms were marching in and out of my front door, carrying silver trays and crates of wine. I ventured to the top of the stairs to watch. They were moving the furniture. My furniture. The recliner where I watched the news every evening was shoved into the garage. The coffee table Patricia had refinished herself was pushed into a corner and covered with a white tablecloth to serve as a bar. "Hey, watch the paint," Melissa yelled at one of the workers. She was standing in the middle of the living room, directing traffic like a general. She was wearing a new dress, something sequined and flashy, that looked entirely inappropriate for a woman whose mother had been buried 24 hours ago. She looked up and saw me standing on the landing. "Dad, don't just stand there creeping everyone out," she snapped. "Go get dressed. People will be arriving at 7. And please try to look alive." I went back to the room and opened the closet. My suits were old. They were well-made wool and tweed bought decades ago, but they were out of style. I chose the best one I had. A charcoal gray suit I had worn to my retirement party 10 years ago. It was a little loose now. Grief had carved 10 pounds off my frame in the last week. I put on a white shirt, fumbling with the buttons. I tied my tie, a dark blue silk one that Patricia had given me. I looked in the mirror. I looked like a ghost. I looked like a man who had already died and was just waiting for his body to catch up. "Perfect," I whispered to my reflection. At 5 o'clock, Brad kicked my door open without knocking. He strode in carrying a garment bag. He tossed it onto the bed. "Change of plans," he said. I looked at the bag. "What is this?" "I can't have you wearing those moth-eaten rags," Brad said, looking me up and down with undisguised disgust. "You look like a funeral director from the 1950s. My investors are classy people, Bill. Image is everything. I bought you something decent." I unzipped the bag. Inside was a suit. It was cheap polyester, shiny and stiff, the kind you buy at a strip mall outlet for $90. It was bright blue. Clown blue. I prefer my own suit, Brad," I said softly. "This one. It doesn't feel like me." "That is the point," Brad sneered. "We are celebrating the future, not the past. Put it on. And for God's sake, put on some deodorant. You smell like Old Spice and despair." He laughed at his own joke. It was a cruel, sharp sound. I put on the suit. It scratched my skin. The sleeves were too long. The color made me look sallow and sickly. When I walked out, Brad was waiting in the hallway. He was wearing a tuxedo, a midnight blue Italian silk tuxedo with a satin lapel. He had used my credit card to buy himself a tuxedo worth $2,000 while buying me a costume that made me look like a game show host. He looked at me and nodded satisfied. Better he lied. At least now you look like you are trying. Come downstairs. The caterers need you to sign for the wine. Apparently my signature isn't enough on your card. We walked down the stairs together. The house was buzzing. Jazz music was playing softly from speakers hidden in the corners. The dining room table, the table where we had eaten Christmas dinners and birthday cakes, was laden with expensive hors d'oeuvres, shrimp cocktail, caviar, truffles. It was a feast fit for royalty, paid for by the man they were evicting. Brad led me to the kitchen. The head caterer, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard, looked up. "Mr. Foster," she asked, "I just need you to authorize the final total." I looked at the receipt. $5,400. Brad stood behind me, his hand resting heavily on my shoulder. It felt like a threat. "Just sign it, Bill," he murmured close to my ear. "Don't embarrass me." I picked up the pen. I looked at the number. This was my money, my hard-earned money. But I signed. I signed with a flourish. "Thank you," the caterer said, tearing off the copy. Brad slapped me on the back. "Good man. Now go sit in the den. Stay out of the way until the guests arrive. I need to brief the staff. I don't want you wandering around confusing people." I walked to the den, my prison cell from the night before, but the door was open. I stepped inside and stopped. They had turned the den into a coat check room. A rack of hangers stood in the middle of the room. My sleeper sofa, the one I had slept on last night, was gone. Where is the sofa?" I asked Melissa, who was arranging flowers on the mantelpiece. "Oh, the movers took it," she said casually, not even turning around. "It was an eyesore, Dad. We can't have guests putting their mink coats on that dirty old thing." "But where will I sleep?" I asked. Melissa turned then, and for a second, just a split second, I saw a flicker of shame in her eyes. But she blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the hard shell of her greed. "We figured you wouldn't mind sleeping in the recliner in the garage tonight," she said. "Just for one night. The transport to Shady Pines comes tomorrow morning at 9 anyway. It is not worth setting up a bed." The garage. They were putting me in the garage like an old lawnmower. "Okay," I said. "That is fine." Brad walked in, checking his watch. It was a Rolex. A fake one, but he wore it like it was real. Showtime people. He clapped his hands. The first car just pulled up. "It is the Davises. Bill, get out here. Stand by the door. Shake hands. Smile. And remember the script. You are happy. You are relieved. You are grateful." I walked to the front door. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs, thump, 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 thump. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation. I watched through the sidelight window as a sleek Mercedes pulled into the driveway. A couple stepped out dressed in evening wear. They looked at my house, my modest 2-story house with the peeling paint on the shutters, and sneered slightly before putting on their fake social smiles. Brad stepped up beside me. He adjusted his bow tie in the hall mirror. He preened. He looked at himself with total adoration. "I am going to own this town, Bill," he whispered to his reflection. "After tonight, nobody is going to look down on Brad Miller ever again." He turned to me, his eyes cold and dead. "Don't screw this up, old man. I mean it. One wrong word and I cut you off completely. No allowance at the home. No visits. Nothing. You will die alone. Do you understand?" I looked at him. I looked at the son-in-law I had welcomed into my family 10 years ago. I looked at the man who was wearing a suit bought with my money, standing in a house built with my sweat, threatening to erase me from existence. I understand, Brad, I said, and I smiled. A genuine smile. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew who was coming down the street right behind the Davises. I opened the door. "Welcome, Brad," boomed, stepping in front of me to greet the guests. "So glad you could make it." I stood in his shadow, the invisible man in the clown blue suit. I shook hands. I nodded. I accepted their condescending pats on the arm. "Oh, Bill, you look—" Well, Mrs. Davis lied, looking at my cheap suit with pity. "It must be so hard losing Patricia. But I hear you are making some big changes, yes?" I said, my voice steady. Big changes. Huge changes. More cars arrived. The house filled with noise. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the smell of the shrimp. Brad was in his element. He was holding court in the living room, a glass of champagne in one hand, gesturing wildly with the other. "My father-in-law here," Brad shouted over the crowd, pointing his glass at me, "is a wise man. He knows when it is time to pass the torch. He knows that the new generation needs capital to build the future. And he has graciously, generously decided to step aside." The crowd clapped, a polite golf clap ripple of applause. Melissa beamed, clinging to Brad's arm like a trophy. I stood by the coat rack, gripping my cane. I checked my phone. One new message from Gianni. "ETA 2 minutes. The shark smells blood." I looked at Brad. He was laughing, throwing his head back, exposing his throat. He thought he was the lion of the Serengeti. He didn't realize he was just a gazelle grazing in the tall grass, and the hunters had already surrounded the herd. "Prepare yourself, Brad," I thought. "The torch you want me to pass. I am about to use it to burn your whole world to the ground." The party was in full swing by 8 o'clock, a cacophony of clinking crystal and hollow laughter that filled every corner of the house my wife and I had built. It was a grotesque masquerade. The living room, usually a place of quiet reading and family board games, had been transformed into a networking event for the morally bankrupt. Brad had invited everyone he wanted to impress: local developers, second-tier politicians, and bankers with shark smiles. These were people who would step over a dying man to pick up a dropped quarter, yet here they were eating my shrimp and drinking my wine, pretending to celebrate my retirement. I stood by the fireplace, clutching a glass of sparkling water, because Brad had forbidden me from drinking the champagne. He said it would look bad if the senile old man got tipsy. I watched them. I watched a man in a velvet blazer wipe his greasy fingers on one of Patricia's embroidered throw pillows. I watched a woman with too much plastic surgery critique the crown molding, loudly suggesting to her friend that the whole place needed to be gutted. They moved through my home like an invasive species, consuming everything, valuing nothing. Occasionally, someone would notice me standing there in my ill-fitting clown blue polyester suit. They would offer me a tight, pitying smile, the kind you give to a stray dog you have no intention of feeding. "So you are the father-in-law?" a man with a comb-over asked, munching on a crab cake. "Brad tells me you are finally downsizing." "Smart move. At your age, who needs the headache of maintenance?" I smiled, a stiff, practiced grimace. "That is right," I said. "Who needs the headache?" He nodded, not listening. His eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "Brad is a good guy for taking this off your hands. Most kids would just stick you in a home and sell the place out from under you. He is really stepping up." I tightened my grip on the glass until I thought it might shatter. Stepping up, that was the narrative Brad had spun. He was the hero. He was the benevolent son-in-law rescuing the helpless widower. I looked over at Brad. He was in the center of the room holding court. He looked manic. His face was flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. He was telling a story, gesturing wildly, and every time he laughed, the circle of sycophants around him laughed too. Melissa was clinging to his arm, playing the role of the devoted wife perfectly. She nodded at everything he said, her eyes bright and vacant. She was wearing my mother's pearl necklace, a piece of jewelry I hadn't seen in years. She must have raided Patricia's jewelry box the moment the ambulance left the driveway. Seeing those pearls around her neck felt like a physical violation, a desecration of something sacred. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. Gianni was late. Or maybe he was right on time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I knew who it was. I just needed to hold on. I just needed to endure this purgatory for a few more minutes. Suddenly the music cut out. The room went quiet save for the clatter of a few forks. Brad stepped onto the raised hearth of the fireplace, tapping a spoon against his champagne flute. Ting, ting, ting. "Attention, everyone! Attention, please!" Brad bellowed, his voice booming with unearned confidence. The crowd turned toward him. The spotlight was exactly where he wanted it. "First of all, thank you all for coming on such short notice," Brad began, flashing his salesman smile. "It means the world to Melissa and me. Tonight is a special night, a night of transitions, a night of new beginnings." He paused for dramatic effect, looking down at his shoes and then up at the ceiling, feigning emotion. "As many of you know, we lost Patricia, my wonderful mother-in-law, just a few days ago. It has been devastating, especially for Bill." He pointed a finger at me. All heads turned. I felt the collective weight of their pity. I lowered my head, playing my part. "Bill has been lost without her," Brad continued, his voice dropping to a somber, sympathetic register that made my skin crawl. "He has been confused. He has been wandering the streets at night. It became clear to Melissa and me that he simply cannot care for himself in this big empty house anymore. It is a safety hazard. And frankly, it is a burden no man his age should have to carry." There were murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Poor thing. So sad. So Brad said, brightening up, switching gears instantly, "We made a decision. A hard decision, but the right one. We decided to take on that burden. We are moving Bill to Shady Pines, a wonderful facility where he will get the 24-hour care he needs. And in exchange, he has graciously decided to pass the torch of this property to us." He raised his glass. "To Bill for knowing when to step aside and let the next generation build the future." To Bill, the crowd chorused, raising their glasses. They drank my wine to celebrate my eviction. "But that is not all," Brad shouted, cutting through the applause. "Because we are family, and because we believe in transparency, I wanted to do this properly. I wanted you all to witness the generosity of this transition." He waved his hand at Melissa. She stepped forward, carrying a leather folder. She looked nervous, her hands shaking slightly, but she masked it with a wide, frozen smile. "Bill, come up here," Brad commanded. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. I walked slowly toward him. I dragged my left leg a little more than necessary. I hunched my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I was the picture of frailty. As I moved through the crowd, people stepped back as if failure was contagious. I reached the fireplace. Brad put his arm around my shoulder. His grip was tight, painful. He was leaning on me literally and metaphorically. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the greed in their eyes. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the house. They were calculating the square footage. They were estimating the renovation costs. I was just a piece of furniture that came with the deal. Melissa opened the folder on the mantelpiece. The documents lay there, crisp and white. The power of attorney, the deed transfer, the final nails in my coffin. "Say a few words," Bill Brad whispered in my ear, his breath smelling of stale champagne and malice. "Tell them how happy you are, and make it good." I turned to face the room. I looked at the chandelier Patricia had cleaned by hand every spring. I looked at the spot on the floor where Melissa had taken her first steps. I looked at the window where I had watched for Brad's car the first time Melissa brought him home. I cleared my throat. The microphone Brad held out to me screeched with feedback. I want to thank you all," I stammered, my voice trembling. It is, it is hard to say goodbye. This house, it has been my life. I paused, looking at Melissa. She was staring at the papers, avoiding my eyes. But Brad is right, I continued, letting a tear roll down my cheek. I am old. I am tired. And I have learned a lot in the last few days. I have learned that family is the most important thing. And sometimes you have to do whatever it takes to ensure that everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Exactly. Brad interrupted, sensing I was rambling. Exactly what they deserve, beautifully said Bill. He handed me a pen. It was a heavy, expensive Mont Blanc, probably stolen from my desk. Sign here, Bill. Right on the line. And then we can cut the cake. The room went silent. The tension was palpable. This was the money shot. This was the moment the shark swallowed the seal. I took the pen. I leaned over the mantelpiece. My hand hovered over the signature line. I could feel Brad's body heat radiating next to me. He was practically vibrating with triumph. He was already spending the money in his head. He was already demolishing the walls. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. A tiny dot of ink appeared. And then the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ding-dong. It was a long, insistent buzz that cut through the silence like a knife. Brad frowned. Who the hell is that? We're all here. He looked at Melissa. Go get it, quickly. Melissa ran to the door. I didn't lift the pen. I kept it there, frozen. We heard the door open. Then we heard voices. Deep, authoritative voices. Brad Miller, a voice boomed from the hallway. Brad froze. The smile dropped from his face like a mask that had lost its string. Who wants to know? Brad shouted back, annoyance coloring his tone. I am in the middle of a speech. Two uniformed officers stepped into the living room. Behind them walked a man in a sharp gray suit carrying a briefcase. And behind him walked Gianni. But it wasn't the Gianni I knew. He wasn't wearing his army jacket. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He looked like a Don. He looked like a kingpin. Brad looked confused. Who are you? What is this? The man in the gray suit stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses. Mr. Miller, I am Arthur Sterling, attorney at law. I represent the estate of the late Patricia Foster, and these officers are here to execute a search warrant. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Brad laughed. A nervous, high-pitched sound. A search warrant. For what? You have the wrong house, pal. This is a party. No, Mr. Miller, Sterling said calmly. We have the right house. We are looking for evidence regarding the falsification of medical prescriptions, elder abuse, and the theft of intellectual property belonging to the Ghost estate. Brad's face went white. White as the paper I was about to sign. He looked at me. I was still leaning over the mantelpiece. I slowly stood up straight. I buttoned my jacket. I dropped the act. The tremor in my hand vanished. I looked him dead in the eye. I think you should put the champagne down, Brad, I said, my voice clear and strong, ringing through the silent room. You are going to need your hands for the handcuffs. I dropped the Mont Blanc pen onto the floor. Clatter. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a sounding block. The party was over. The eviction had begun. The silence in the living room was absolute. A moment ago, it had been filled with the murmurs of false sympathy and the clinking of expensive crystal, but now the air was so still I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. Every eye was fixed on me. They were watching the old lion finally lay down his head to let the jackals feed. I could feel their collective anticipation, a hungry voyeuristic energy that pricked at the back of my neck. To them, this was not a tragedy. It was a transaction. It was entertainment. I leaned over the mantelpiece, the heat from the gas fireplace warming my legs through the cheap polyester of the blue suit. The document lay open before me, the white pages stark and bright against the dark wood. Quitclaim deed, irrevocable power of attorney. The legal terms were printed in bold, uncompromising black letters. These were not just words, they were the keys to my kingdom. They were the rights to the garden where Patricia had planted her hydrangeas. They were the ownership of the walls that held the pencil marks, measuring Melissa's height from toddler to teenager. They were the legal surrender of my entire history. Brad was standing so close to me I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was practically vibrating. His cologne, that sharp chemical scent he seemed to bathe in, was overwhelming at this range. It smelled like desperation, masked as success. I could hear his breathing shallow and rapid, a staccato rhythm of greed. He was terrified that I would hesitate, yet exhilarated that he was seconds away from the finish line. He placed a hand on my back, right between my shoulder blades. To the audience, it looked like a gesture of support, a son guiding his frail father. But I felt the pressure. His fingers were digging in a subtle, painful warning. "Sign it, old man. Do not embarrass me." I looked down at the Mont Blanc pen he had shoved into my hand. It was heavy, balanced, a beautiful instrument of writing. I recognized it immediately. It was mine. Patricia had given it to me for our 30th anniversary. It had been sitting in my desk drawer in the study inside its velvet case for years. Brad must have rooted through my desk while I was in the shower, claiming it as his own before the ink on the deed was even wet. The theft was small compared to the house, but it stung with a particular cruelty. He was using my own gift, a symbol of my wife's love, to sign away her legacy. My hand hovered over the signature line. I let it tremble. I wanted them to see the frailty. I wanted them to believe that my hesitation was born of weakness, of a senile mind struggling to process the finality of the moment. I watched the tip of the nib dance a millimeter above the paper. "Sign it." Bill Brad whispered, his voice a hiss that only I could hear. "Just scribble your name and it is over. Then you can go sit down and eat your shrimp." I looked up from the paper, letting my gaze drift over the room one last time. I saw the investors Brad was trying so hard to impress. The man with the comb-over was leaning forward, his eyes narrowed, calculating the resale value of the property in real time. The woman with the plastic surgery was whispering something to her husband, probably making a bet on how long I would last in the nursing home. And then I saw Melissa. My daughter was standing near the window, clutching her leather clutch so hard her knuckles were white. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the pen. Her eyes were wide, fixed on that point of contact between ink and paper. There was no sadness in her face. There was no reluctance. There was only a terrifying hunger. She looked like a starving animal waiting for the butcher to drop the scrap of meat. In that moment, any lingering doubt I had, any tiny shred of paternal instinct that might have urged me to show mercy, evaporated. I wasn't looking at my child anymore. I was looking at a stranger who had simply borrowed her face. I looked back at the paper. I lowered the pen. The metal tip touched the fiber of the document. A tiny black dot of ink bled into the white space. The point of no return. The room seemed to hold its breath. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Patricia had restored 3 years ago. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It sounded like a countdown. It sounded like a heartbeat. Brad let out a soft exhale, his shoulders relaxing slightly. He thought he had won. He thought the ink was flowing. He was already mentally redecorating the living room, tearing down the wallpaper Patricia loved, installing some cold, modern monstrosity that would impress his hollow friends. But the pen stopped moving. I didn't write the W. I didn't write the I. I just held the nib there, pressing down until the dot of ink grew larger, a black hole threatening to swallow the page. Bill Brad whispered, the tension snapping back into his frame like a rubber band. What are you doing? Right. I slowly lifted my head. I didn't turn to look at him. I looked straight ahead into the reflection of the large mirror hanging over the sofa. I saw myself. I saw the ridiculous blue suit. I saw the gray hair. But I didn't see a victim. I saw a man who had woken up. I turned my wrist, slowly rotating the pen so the light caught the gold accents. It was a beautiful pen. Too beautiful to be used for a lie. I can't. I said, my voice barely a whisper, but in the silence it carried to the back of the room. Brad's grip on my shoulder tightened painfully. What did you say? I can't sign this, Brad, I said louder this time. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone cleared their throat uncomfortably. Melissa took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. Dad. What is wrong? She asked, her voice high and tight. Your hand is shaking too much. Here, let me help you guide it. She reached out, intending to put her hand over mine to force my will into the paper. I pulled my hand back. No, Melissa, I said. It is not my hand. It is my conscience. Brad's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He leaned in, his face inches from mine, abandoning the pretense of the loving son. Don't you dare do this, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare humiliate me in front of these people. Sign the damn paper, old man, or I swear to God I will throw you out on the street tonight. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. I looked at the panic dancing behind his rage. He was terrified. He was leveraged to the hilt. He had promised this asset to the sharks in the room, and if I walked away, they would eat him alive. I smiled. It was a cold, small smile. I think you misunderstood the arrangement. Brad, I said calmly. I lifted the pen high in the air, holding it like a gavel. I am not passing the torch, I said. I am lighting the fuse. I opened my fingers. The Mont Blanc pen fell. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, turning end over end. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, definitive clatter that echoed like a gunshot. Clack! It rolled across the floorboards and came to a stop at Melissa's feet. I stepped back from the mantelpiece. I unbuttoned the jacket of the cheap blue suit. I stood up to my full height, pushing Brad's hand off my shoulder, as if it were a piece of lint. The deal is off, I announced, my voice booming with the authority of the engineer who had once commanded construction sites. And the party is just beginning. The sound of the pen hitting the floor seemed to echo for an eternity, vibrating in the silence like a dropped cymbal. Brad stared at the Mont Blanc lying near his wife's feet, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. For a moment, I thought he was going to strike me right there in front of the police officers and his investors. His hands balled into fists, his knuckles turning white, and a vein in his forehead throbbed with a dangerous rhythm. He took a step toward me, his lips pulled back in a snarl, ignoring the uniforms standing in the foyer. You senile old fool, Brad, hissed, his voice trembling with rage. Do you have any idea what you have just done? You just threw away your future. You just threw away the only roof over your head. I did not flinch. I did not step back. For the first time in 10 years, I did not fear him. I looked past him, my gaze locking onto the massive 65-inch flat-screen televisions mounted above the fireplace. It was the centerpiece of the room, the expensive toy he had bought using my credit card 2 months ago, claiming it was for the family, when in reality it was for his football games. I walked past him, moving with a speed that surprised even me. I felt the eyes of the crowd tracking my every movement. They were confused, whispering behind their hands, unsure if this was part of the show or a genuine breakdown. I reached the media console and pulled the HDMI cable from the back of the cable box. What are you doing? Melissa shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. Dad, stop it. You are embarrassing us. I reached into the inner pocket of my cheap blue suit and pulled out the iPad. It felt cool and heavy in my hand, a slate of judgment ready to be delivered. I plugged the cable into the adapter. The massive screen behind me flickered the image of a sports channel, replaced instantly by the stark, bright home screen of the tablet. Brad lunged forward. "Turn it off," he shouted. "He is having an episode, someone help him." But Gianni stepped in. The old landlord moved with the quickness of a street fighter, blocking Brad's path with a subtle but firm shoulder check. The police officers took a step into the room, their hands resting on their belts, a silent warning that kept Brad frozen in place. I turned to face the room. I looked at the investors who were clutching their champagne flutes. I looked at the neighbors who had come to gossip. And finally, I looked at my daughter and her husband. They looked small now. They looked terrified. They knew deep down in their blackened hearts that the reckoning had arrived. "You wanted a celebration," I said, my voice calm and projecting to the back of the room without the need for a microphone. "You invited all these people here to witness a transfer of wealth. You wanted everyone to see what my wife left behind." I tapped the screen, bringing up the video file. A thumbnail of Patricia's face, looking tired but determined, filled the giant monitor. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Melissa put her hand over her mouth, her eyes widening, as she recognized the background of the video and the secret workshop she never knew existed. "You spent the last week talking about what you deserved." I continued, my eyes boring into Brad's. "You talked about legacy. You talked about the future." Well, Patricia listened. She listened to every word you said when you thought she was dying. She saw every move you made when you thought she was blind. I hovered my finger over the play button. The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like the air had been sucked out. Brad opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to threaten, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed by the ghost on the screen. "I have one final gift for you," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "And it is the only thing you are going to get from us." I pressed play. The video on the screen began with a timestamp. October 12th, 8:43 p.m. The setting was unmistakable. It was the kitchen of this very house, the granite island where I had eaten breakfast for 15 years, visible in the high-definition glow. The angle was slightly elevated, captured from a hidden camera Patricia had concealed inside the decorative clock above the pantry. The room fell into a silence so profound, it felt like a vacuum sucking the oxygen out of the lungs of every socialite and banker present. On the screen, Brad walked into the frame. He was wearing his pajamas, looking relaxed, whistling a tune. He opened the cabinet where Patricia kept her medication. The high-quality microphone picked up the distinct rattle of pills. He pulled out 2 orange bottles. Next to him, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine, was Melissa, my daughter. The crowd watched as Brad uncapped the first bottle, Patricia's life-saving heart medication, and dumped the contents into a plastic sandwich bag. Then he took a second bottle from his pocket, filled with white, chalky tablets, and poured them into the prescription container. "Are you sure those look right?" the digital Melissa asked on the screen. Her voice was clear, crisp, and damning. "They are close enough," Brad's voice replied, echoing through the silent living room. "They are just caffeine and water pills. It will speed things up. Her heart is already a ticking time bomb. We are just cutting the wire a few days early." The reaction in the living room was instantaneous and violent. It started with a gasp, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a physical blow. Then a glass shattered. Someone dropped their champagne flute, the crystal exploding on the hardwood floor, but no one looked down. Their eyes were glued to the screen, watching the man who had just toasted to his own generosity commit a cold-blooded crime. Brad let out a sound that was not human. It was a strangled, high-pitched yelp of pure terror. He lunged toward the television, his arms flailing, desperate to rip the screen from the wall, to silence the truth that was destroying him. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his face turning a mottled purple. "It is a deep fake. He made it up. It is a..." But he never reached the television. Gianni moved with the speed of a man half his age, stepping into Brad's path and shoving him backward. Brad stumbled his expensive tuxedo shoes, slipping on the spilled champagne, and he crashed onto the floor in a heap of tangled limbs and humiliation. That was the signal. The two police officers who had been standing by the door moved in. They did not run. They walked with the heavy, deliberate pace of inevitability. The sound of their boots on the floorboards was the drumbeat of justice. Brad Miller. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Patricia Foster, elder abuse and grand larceny. The first officer announced, his voice booming over the sound of Brad's frantic denials. No, you can't touch me. Do you know who I am? Brad shrieked, scrambling backward on the floor like a crab kicking his legs out. I am an investor. I own this house. That old man is senile. He doctored the tape. Get up, the officer said, grabbing Brad by the lapel of his midnight blue tuxedo and hauling him to his feet. Brad thrashed, his eyes wild, scanning the room for an ally. He looked at the investors he had tried so hard to impress. But they were not looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with revulsion. And then the phones came out. It started with one, then three, then a dozen. The guests, the vultures he had invited to witness his triumph, were now filming his demise. The flashes of cameras went off like strobe lights, capturing every second of his disgrace for the world to see. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be the center of attention. Now he was. Melissa stood frozen by the fireplace, her face the color of ash. She watched the police slam Brad against the wall. She heard the metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists. The sound seemed to snap her out of her trance. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears that I knew were not for her mother, but for herself. Dad. She whimpered, taking a step toward me. Dad, please. You have to tell them. Brad made me do it. I didn't want to. He said we needed the money. He said... She reached out to grab my arm, her fingers clutching at the fabric of my cheap blue suit. Don't touch him, Mr. Hartman, the lawyer stepped between us. His voice was like a razor blade, sharp and cold. Miss Foster, you are also named in the warrant. Conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. The second officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Melissa screamed. It was a piercing, childish scream of disbelief. No, I have kids. You can't arrest me, Dad. Stop them, I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had carried on my shoulders. The daughter I had taught to ride a bike, the daughter I had forgiven 1,000 times. But the woman screaming in front of me was not my daughter. She was an accomplice. She was the woman who stood in the kitchen drinking wine while her husband swapped her mother's medicine for poison. I took a step back, distancing myself from her grasping hands. You made your choice, Melissa, I said softly, my voice barely audible over the chaos, but she heard me. You chose him. You chose the money. Now you have to keep them. The officer spun her around. The sound of the cuffs clicking onto her wrists was the final punctuation mark on 40 years of unconditional love that had been abused until it broke. The room was a frenzy of motion. The guests were fleeing, scrambling for their coats, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. The woman with the plastic surgery was live streaming the arrest, narrating into her phone with breathless excitement. The man with the comb-over was already on the phone with his lawyer, ensuring his name wouldn't be attached to Brad's failed projects. Brad was being dragged toward the door. He was weeping now, ugly, snot-nosed sobs that destroyed the last shred of his dignity. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with hate and confusion. You ruined everything, he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. You are nothing. You are just a useless old man. I watched him go. I watched the police shove him into the back of the cruiser, the red and blue lights flashing through the bay window, illuminating the empty living room in a chaotic disco of consequences. Mr. Hartman walked over to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It is done, William, he said quietly. We have the evidence. The video, the bank records, the testimony from the pharmacy. They are not coming back. Not for a long, long time. I nodded, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. The heavy weight of the secret, the crushing burden of grief and rage had lifted. The house was clearing out. The caterers were packing up the untouched food, looking at me with wide, fearful eyes. I walked over to the mantelpiece where the unsigned deed still lay. I picked it up. I slowly tore it in half, then in half again. I tossed the confetti of paper into the gas fireplace. The flames licked at the edges, curling the paper, turning the legal jargon into black ash. Gianni walked up to me holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to me. "For Patricia," he said, raising his glass. "For Patricia," I whispered. I took a sip. It was cold and crisp. It tasted like victory. I looked around the room. It was messy. There was broken glass on the floor. There were muddy footprints on the rug. But for the first time in years, the air in the house felt clean. The rot had been cut out. The termites had been exterminated. I walked to the window and watched the police cars pull away, carrying the 2 people who had tried to bury me. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. The kind of peace that comes after a violent storm, when the wind finally dies down and you realize the foundation of your house is still standing. I turned back to Gianni. "Tomorrow," I said, setting the glass down. "Tomorrow we book 2 tickets to Italy. I have a sunset to catch." Gianni smiled a genuine warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "First class, William," he said. "First class all the way." I looked at the television screen, which was now frozen on the image of the empty kitchen. I picked up the remote and turned it off. The screen went black, reflecting the image of an old man in a cheap blue suit standing tall in his own home. I am not a victim, I thought. I am a survivor. And my life, my real life, starts now. The wheels of justice turn slowly, they say. But when you grease them with high-definition video evidence and a shark like Arthur Hartman, they move with terrifying speed. The trial was a circus, but I did not attend. I had no interest in seeing Brad try to charm a jury or watching Melissa cry crocodile tears in a prison jumpsuit. Mr. Hartman handled everything. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon to tell me the verdict. Brad received 15 years for attempted murder and fraud. Melissa got 8 years for conspiracy and elder abuse. They blamed each other until the very end, screaming accusations across the courtroom as the bailiffs dragged them away. Their love, it turned out, was just as fragile as their finances. I sold the house on Elm Street 3 weeks later. I did not wait for the market to peak. I sold it to a young couple, an architect and a teacher, who looked at the peeling paint and saw potential instead of profit. I left the furniture. I left the curtains. I even left the tools in the garage. The only thing I took was the urn containing Patricia's ashes and the iPad with her voice. Walking out of that front door for the last time, I expected to feel a pang of loss, but all I felt was the lifting of a heavy anchor. That house was a museum of memories, but I was done living in the past. Now I am sitting in the first-class lounge at SeaTac Airport, watching the rain streak against the massive glass windows. But for the first time in 40 years, the rain does not look dreary. It looks like it is washing the world clean. Next to me, Gianni is reading a newspaper and sipping an espresso. He is wearing a linen suit that costs more than my old car. He looks up and catches me staring. "Ready for the Amalfi Coast?" "William," he asks, his eyes twinkling. I look down at the 2 tickets in my hand. Flight 820 to Rome. One way. "I am ready," I say. I reach into my carry-on bag and touch the velvet box containing the Patek Philippe watch Patricia restored. It is ticking against my fingertips, a steady rhythmic heartbeat that reminds me she is still here. She is not in the house. She is not in the grave. She is in the freedom she bought for me with her talent and her silence. I realized something during these last few turbulent weeks. We spend our lives building shelters for the people we love. We sacrifice our dreams to pay for their colleges, their weddings, their mistakes. We hollow ourselves out to keep them warm. But sometimes in doing so, we forget that we deserve to be warm too. Patricia had to hide her brilliance in a dark room in Chinatown to save me, but she also gave me the map to find myself again. The intercom chimes, announcing the boarding for our flight. I stand up, not with the help of a cane, but on my own 2 feet. My knees still ache occasionally, but the pain is different now. It is the pain of living, not the pain of decaying. I walk toward the gate, leaving behind the ghost of the man who was afraid of his own children. I am 68 years old. I have a new business partner, a fortune in the bank, and a ghost who whispers courage in my ear. I look out at the runway, where the silver planes are waiting to defy gravity. "This is for you, Patricia," I whisper. I hand my boarding pass to the attendant. She scans it. It beeps a cheerful affirmative sound. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. Foster," she says with a smile. I smile back, and for the first time in a long time it reaches my eyes. "I will," I say. "I really will." And as I walk down the jet bridge, I don't look back. The story of William the victim is over. The story of William the free man has just begun. We often cling to the illusion of family, believing that shared blood guarantees shared loyalty. But as I board this plane, I realize that true family is built on respect, not obligation. Patricia taught me that silence is not weakness, and that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. We cannot control how others treat us, but we can control when we stop accepting it. Do not let anyone, not even your own children, make you feel like a burden in your own life. You are the architect of your own ending. And sometimes the best way to build a new life is to be brave enough to demolish the old one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and redemption. I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven them, or would you have pressed play on that video? Let me know your thoughts below. See you in the next story.